Welcome to Cadalyst Magazine's CAD Manager Chronicles with CAD management expert Robert Green. This episode is sponsored by DraftSite from SolidWorks.
Welcome to the CAD Manager Chronicles. I'm your host, Robert Green. Sometimes we CAD managers get so far into the weeds of specific projects that we forget to tend to the basic skill set that we must use as CAD managers to be successful in the first place. Now, sometimes I'm guilty of not clarifying what some of those basic skills are, but no more of that. The CAD Manager Chronicles will talk about some of these back-to-basic skills and strategies that every CAD manager needs to function at maximum efficiency. In this edition, we'll kick things off with useful communication techniques, and in particular, the elevator pitch. Here goes. Communicate via the elevator pitch. Do you use elevator pitches? You should. The elevator pitch is a very brief explanation of an otherwise complex concept, using the simplest terms possible with the sole goal of getting the other person interested in hearing more. The reason it's called an elevator pitch is it should be conveyed in the span of time a typical elevator ride would take. Now, I already know that many of you are thinking, well, that sounds like a sales pitch, and I'm not a salesperson, I'm a CAD manager. And to this I reply, well, when you ask for new workstations, plotters, software tools, training budgets, procedural authority, aren't you really making a sales pitch to your boss? Now, when you think about it this way, you'll realize that clearly and briefly conveying your concepts to your boss, so they'll be interested in hearing more, is the best way to communicate. Let's examine some classic CAD management topics in the context of an elevator pitch with follow-up scripts, and hope that you'll see how powerful this technique really is. Standards. As I've often stated, I don't care what software you manage or what type of projects you work on. You must have CAD standards to maintain consistency and sanity. Yet we all experience users and project managers who deviate from or simply ignore the standards. So how should we handle this issue before it blows up into a bigger problem? Well, the answer is to have proactive conversations with senior management. How might an elevator pitch do that? Let's have a look. We could say, CAD standards really aren't about me trying to control or dominate user behavior. They're simply an attempt to create consistency so our projects will move forward faster and cost us less in rework time later. That didn't take too long, did it? And it conveyed the core concept of what we're trying to communicate regarding standards. Now, if your boss is interested, the follow-up conversation might be something like, well, it might seem like the CAD manager is trying to dominate the conversation. The reality is we just want consistency so we can make projects run predictably and lower our rates of error. What the standard isn't as important is the fact that everybody observes a consistent standard. I'm more than willing to work with anybody who has better ideas about how to standardize our workflows. My only motivation is to make our projects flow better and be more profitable. Please help me by making it clear that you support standard work processes. Conclusion. By framing the standards problem in terms of efficiency and savings, you've turned a technical issue into something financial, making it more interesting and important for your boss. The challenge now is to keep the conversation going and provide examples where lack of standards has cost time, so your boss will support the standardization. The training problem. Now, unless you manage users who immediately understand all new software functions and features, you must have some sort of training program, right? But when management sees training as something that costs money and contributes to non-billable time, how can you get approval? Well, this is the age-old problem that CAD managers have in implementing training. A strategy I've used with great success is to tie the standards problem to the argument for training. In fact, you may even want to have the conversation about both at the same time. Here's a suggested elevator pitch. We've invested a lot of time and effort into CAD tools and standards to make our projects more profitable. But if we don't train people on how to use these tools properly, how can we expect users to do what we want? Seems reasonable when it's communicated in that manner, doesn't it? Now, the follow-up might be, if 1 hour of training per person on project standards and startup logistics saves us an hour of rework later, then the training pays for itself. Now, in reality, I've observed that the time to fix these errors far exceeds the amount of time we would spend training, which means training will give us a great return on our investment. Now, please understand, I'm not advocating training just to have training. I'm training people to achieve better project execution. Not training users isn't saving us anything. It's inviting error and inconsistency and costing us. Now, the conclusion here is, by framing the training discussion in terms of time savings, you appeal to senior management, project managers, and users alike. After all, everyone wants to save time. Your challenge now is to implement a bare-bones training strategy that delivers time savings and reduced project rework. The hardware problem. No matter what industry you work in, CAD tools run on computers. Now, the problem I often see is that many IT departments don't consult with a CAD manager, which leads them to purchase hardware that's inadequate for running high-end CAD and BIM tools. Now, compounding this problem is that CAD and BIM models seem to grow exponentially. So this year's inadequate hardware purchases will become even more inadequate next year. Now, if you don't want your users to struggle and waste time with inadequate hardware, you must become involved in the hardware specification, budgeting, and purchasing process. But how can you do that? Well, how about an elevator pitch? Let's try this. When workstations run slow, so do our projects. When computers crash, we lose more time rebooting and reloading. In our effort to save money on computers, we're actually costing ourselves more than we save. Now, your follow-up can be, every time a clash detection, rendering, or energy analysis program crashes, we have to reload everything and start again. And when this happens, we're wasting an expensive engineer's time. Are we really willing to pay that much money for an expensive engineer to start projects over and over again because a $3,000 workstation is too expensive? If we think about it in these terms, you can see that by changing the way you talk about hardware, you open your management's eyes to considering hardware as an efficiency generator rather than an expense. Your challenge will now be to provide specific examples of inadequate hardware that causes loss of work hours. If you provide these real-world examples, management is much more likely to believe your line of reasoning because time really is money. The budget conundrum. After you ask for training time and new computers, the topic of budgeting is likely to come up. CAD managers often have the reputation of asking for expensive products and wanting a lot for their users. Now, I've encountered this bias from my bosses in the past, and I hear it all the time at client sites. So how can you make sure you're being seen as reasonable in your requests? How about an elevator pitch? Say, I realize that when I submit budget items, it seems like I want a lot. I also understand that my hardware and training requests aren't cheap, but please know I'll never ask for anything unless it will make us more efficient. And here's your follow-up. I'm happy to provide you with sample ROI and savings calculations and the data that's based on actual project experience. I want you to know I'm not making this up, and I don't expect you to approve my requests without showing you why. So what are your questions? What data would you like to see to prove my budget requests are reasonable? I'm open to cross-examination and I welcome your feedback. My only goal here is to make us better. I'm really not asking for luxury items. I'm asking for practical tools. Now, the conclusion here is that by re-emphasizing that you're only asking for budget items that save time, you'll be seen as business-minded and proactive and managerial. Your challenge will be to keep sending this message month after month, year after year, as you submit budget requests, so your management will come to trust your judgment. To sum up, dealing with complexities day in and day out is simply what CAD managers do. But we must all strive to remember that interacting with others who don't understand those complexities determines how successful we ultimately are. And after all, if your boss doesn't understand what you need, then how can they provide it for you? Now, my hope is that you'll use the elevator pitch strategy and follow-up method examples that I've outlined to discuss issues with your senior management team. I've found that the time I've spent learning to pitch my ideas and requests in brief elevator pitch style has made me a better CAD manager all around and a more successful consultant. So I'm pretty confident it'll help you as well. I hope you've enjoyed the CAD Manager Chronicles, and please continue to check in as we do more. I look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks for joining us today. Until next time, read more from Robert Green at Cadalyst.com. Thank you to our sponsor, DraftSite from SolidWorks.